Hello, BookTube. It's Tuesday, and I want to do a tag for Tag Tuesday, the Bookish Elements Tag, which I've seen going around. I've seen a number of channels do it. It was created by Sarah at My Granny Era, a channel I had not known about until I chased back the origins of this tag. Subscribed to it already. It looks like a really fun channel. She did not tag me because she hates me because I smell. I also saw it on Book Chat with Pat, and Book Chat with Pat's answers were wonderful as always, but she did not tag me because she hates me because I smell. And I saw it on Hannah Spivey's channel, who opened his video inimitably by wondering how many of you out there subscribe to his channel merely for the eye candy. And you know, I have the same question about this channel. I'm afraid to ask the question because I'm afraid it'll be just everybody. That nobody's here for any of the brain content. I'm not just a pretty face. But he didn't tag me either because he hates me. Because I smell. I'm doing it anyway because I like it. It's all the different moving parts that go along with your reading, if you have any. And prompt number 1 is, how do you feel about foreshadowing or dropped hints? And my main feeling about those things is nostalgic. They make me wistful. They don't happen anymore in contemporary fiction, which is the only place you'd put them. You wouldn't put them in nonfiction. They don't happen in contemporary fiction for a simple reason, that all contemporary fiction is first draft. And the one thing you won't one of the many things you won't effectively be able to do in the first draft of a novel is foreshadowing and hint dropping. Because you haven't written the thing yet. So those are gone. Those you can draw a completely accurate diagnostic line in a book depending on skills like that, as to when the book came out, as to when the book was written. You can predict almost to the month, but certainly to the year when the book came out. Because if it's modern contemporary fiction, it has not been edited. It probably has not been drafted, just the one time. So there won't be any foreshadowing. So mainly nostalgic. Let's see here. Number 2. I'm on the little iPad here, by the way. Prompt number 2 is bookmarks. What do you use? How do you feel about bending the corner down? I bend corners down appropriately, in my case called dog-earing, all the time, but usually only in galley copies. For those of you who are new to the channel, I am a book reviewer. I get galley copies every day, and those are the preliminary versions of the finished book you're going to see in the bookstore. Usually they are. So the book will come out as a $35 hardcover, but the galley is a paperback. And it usually doesn't have all the bells and whistles. Usually it won't have illustrations yet. And usually it won't have the index, sometimes an acknowledgement section or whatnot. And you're always told, as in a pro forma way, please don't jump on, please wait until you get the finished copy and refer to that in your review. And the reason for that is not because there are going to be substantial changes, because books are not edited, so there aren't going to be substantial changes, but because if there are slight changes, things that a computer can find, like spelling mistakes, typos of some kind or other, you don't want to pounce on those in your review if they are going to be fixed in the finished copy, which always strikes me as, I mean, that's what that admonition from publishers means. When the publishers say, please don't quote from the galley copy, wait and quote from the finished copy. If you were to ask a publicist or a publisher, they would say, well, because the book is still it's in quantum flux, and you might not be quoting from the finished product. I have never once in the last 25 years known that to be true. What they're really saying is, don't spend a paragraph of your review on a misplaced comma or a poorly done set of parentheses, when that actually might be changed in the finished copy. And I always want to say, well, what reviewer that anyone is ever going to pay attention to, what professional is going to waste a paragraph on that anyway? I mean, it's one thing if a finished copy of a book comes out into the world from a reputable publisher and it's full of mistakes like that, orthographical errors like that. That's one thing. But anyway, those galley copies, I have just always operated for the last 20 years, and also for a long time before that. I operated on the assumption that nobody cares about those things. Nobody keeps them, nobody collects them, except the weirdos who collect anything. But nobody's going to want a galley copy on their shelf if they can have either the finished trade paperback or the finished hardcover. So I don't see it as much of a sin to do that. When I get a nice finished copy of a book, a hardcover, I tend not to dog-ear the pages. Of course, that's largely practical. I don't need to, because I'm not marking places for a review. When I get the finished copy, the review is usually done. So I don't know if that weren't true, maybe I would dog-ear hardcover pages. But for galley copies, those are my two excuses. One is that I don't think anybody cares what kind of shape those things are in, and two, it's so convenient. It's just so convenient to do that. So I do that with review copies. I do that all the time. But as far as other bookmarks go, I like the kind that have tassels. This is a very pretty thing that I find all of these, I don't buy any of them. I find them in other books. And I like the kinds with tassels so that I can see right away where it is in the book. There's something about that I kind of like. You know what I don't like about it? Everything. I don't like everything about it. It's delicate, so it can break. It can. Oh, there it is. There it goes. Oh, where is it? Where'd it go? Okay, I've got the book. Where'd my bookmark go? I don't want to dog-ear the page, God forbid. But where did it go? And also it's delicate. I mean, this thing is metal with a string for the tassel that could fall apart in no time at all. Not thanks to you. I currently have a dog who does not destroy things. And who would probably, I've never tested it, but probably she would stop other dogs here from destroying things as well, because that's disorderly and she does not like disorder. But in the past I have had dogs that would have treated this as a dinner bell. That's what I use for print and paper books. And like everything connected with print and paper books, it's incredibly inconvenient. I didn't always think that. I still reflexively sometimes don't think that, because all of us of a certain age remember decades and decades when there was no other alternative. No, it's not there was an alternative somewhere for the 1%. It's that the alternative was not yet invented. So it was inconceivable. We did not think about it. So all the inconveniences of a print and paper book slipping out of its dust jacket, or falling on your face when you nod off in bed, or losing your place, or where was that note that I left, or where's my bookmark? Oh, it dropped. Oh, where'd it go? All of those things, broken spines, all of those things, all of those inconveniences, to say nothing of weight. I don't have to imagine. If you're a certain age, you can remember traveling. I've done a lot of traveling, and I had to lug around books. You did too. All of those things we didn't consider inconveniences because there was no alternative. We didn't think about it. But now that an alternative exists, an entirely superior alternative, I use this kind of thing if I'm reading a print and paper book. But what I really use is this. I can put as many bookmarks in this book as I want. This is George Boleyn, Tudor Poet, Courtier, and Diplomat by Claire Sherry and Claire Ridgway. I can put as many bookmarks in this as I want. I can bookmark every page if I wanted to, without making it look any different, without making it look weird, or having any risk of those bookmarks falling out, or being destroyed, or falling apart. I could do that as many times as I want in this book. But then we're going to be touching on electronic formats, don't you worry. Prompt number 3 is forgotten bookmarks. Have you ever found something strange in a book? I have. The late lamented Jason Harrigan of BookTube fame has had a channel a couple of times, and he used to talk years and years ago on his channel about the fact that millions of books have passed through his hands. That was his phrasing, and that was very well chosen phrasing, because it meant not that he owned them, or that he cherished them, or that he sold them, in his case, but that he's handled them. That many books. And it's the same thing with me and a few other really bookish heads on BookTube. Millions of books have passed through my hands. Millions of them. So I have seen everything there is to see in a book. Out in the Brattle sale lot, in a whole bunch of other used bookstores in Texas and Iowa, I have seen pretty much everything you can put in a book. Yes. Including multiple times things that I am sure were not in there because they were bookmarks. They were just in there because it was a neat place to store something. uh, Although, when it comes to bookmarks, actual physical print and paper bookmarks, one of the things that I have tended to use in my life very ill-advisedly is U.S. currency. Because U.S. currency, very weirdly, U.S. currency is all the same size. All the amounts are the same size, and they all look identical, except for one picture in the middle. They all look identical. And the size that they are, the size that U.S. currency is absolutely perfect as a bookmark. Bookmarks imitate that shape. They don't have tassels, it's true, but very often, when I was back in the world of only print and paper books, I would want to put a bookmark in a book, and the only thing I had near me that worked perfectly, which was a piece of U.S. currency. So I often did that. And I don't know if I've given the clear impression here. Probably I have. I'm not very good with money. It's not... I'm not very good. The phrase "not very good" probably isn't accurate enough or specific enough. I don't care about it in the way that I should. I'm generous with it to other people, but I don't care. It's a little side effect of someone else handling that entire side of your life for a long, long time, is that you stop really caring about it in the way that I would just, when I needed a bookmark, I would just grab a piece of U.S. currency and put it in that place. And you know how it is with books. You sometimes get distracted. You sometimes move away from a book before you finished it. You put the bookmark in, you put it, and you forget about it. That has happened to me many, many times, many, many times, where I will come across a book on the shelf and page through it and find a dollar bill inside or something like that. And one time I was in the Brattle sale lot. The Brattle is a bookstore here in Boston. They have an outdoor sale lot where the books are $1, $3, and $5. I spend most of my time out in the sale lot just communing with the books. I just love it. It's totally spoiled me for paying a lot for books. That and getting books in the mail from publishers has totally spoiled me. So that the rest of you, or a lot of people who don't have access to a bookstore like that, you go to your used bookstore, your local, a normal used bookstore, and you find a copy of a book that you're looking for, and it's $10, and you're thinking, oh, that's a good deal. I would scream and run out the door. But one time I found a book in the Brattle sale lot, and I went, ooh, this looks interesting. I've read this before. I wonder where my copy is. And I picked the book up, and I was thumbing through it, and I saw that someone had used a $20 bill as a bookmark. And I thought, my very first thought was, oh, well, thank God. I've got so much crap from my friends for doing that. But it turns out somebody else does that as well. And then, belatedly, I checked for my mark on the book, and it was there. It was indeed my book. So where my copy is, well, that's the answer. I at some point in the distant past grew disenchanted with my copy and put it on a Brattle sale pile. And it ended up in the Brattle sale lot who knows how long later. So I bought the book again. And just when I say that I don't care about money in the way that I probably should, in the way that I definitely should, that's reflected by two facts. One is that the nearest thing to me at the time when I needed a bookmark was not a $1 bill, it was a $20 bill. And I used it as a bookmark and then forgot about it. But the other thing that signals that indifference to money is that when I got the book back, I'm fairly certain I left that in there. It's probably still in there in the little book. So I found lots and lots of stuff, including once. Oh my God, I could go on forever. In one book, I was thumbing through it in the Brattle sale lot. I didn't buy it, but I was thumbing through it in the Brattle sale lot, and I got almost all the way to the end. It was the page that announced the final chapter of the book, and there was a little piece of paper in there on what used to be a kind of stationary card They probably still make them. They weren't like a calling card. They were just a little card for a little note. It was not a letter. It even had a name of its own. Uh, and I found that card. It was still stiff paper, so it stuck out. And on it was the line, "I'm leaving you." And that's it. No name, no date, no nothing like that. So I can't imagine that if you were the recipient of that note, you would have left it in there. Or if you did, I can't imagine you get rid of the book. So did the person ever see it? Did the recipient ever see it? No idea. Oh, but endless stories like that. So let's since it's endless, let's just move on before we lose the light, because I know that's going to happen. We're going to lose the daylight. Prompt number 4, inscriptions and annotations. How do you feel about writing in a book, and how do you annotate if you do? I very much do annotate. Yeah, I write in books all the time, especially if I get caught up in a book. And as I mentioned a couple of times in recent videos, it's not that hard for me to get caught up in a book. I am predisposed to do it. I am the opposite of what happens to most extremely experienced book critics. I am the opposite of jaded. I'm just a kid in a candy store when I start a book. Even if all of my instincts are against it, I'm still, that opening it and starting it still fills me with that rush of wonder. An author has to start smacking my knuckles to really get that feeling to stop. It can happen. It did just last night. It often happens. It more often than not happens. But it isn't how I start. It isn't how I open the experience. And so if I get caught up in a book, I annotate it like crazy, which has led to a great number of denunciations on the part of a great number of you when I have confessed that during the decades in my life when I made very active use of the library, well, I annotate in pencil, and I don't annotate dumb. I'm not just blindly underlining a word. I'm adding something to the text. I'm saying good point, or what did you say on page 110, or this isn't true, read your own footnote, or something like that. I'm definitely present on the page, but when that happens when I get caught up in a book, and I used to get caught up in library books, afraid to say, I don't make any use of the library now. I guess you library fans are probably saying good. I want to go back to making use of the library. I have been in torturous Voxer contact with one long-suffering soul for months and months, trying to figure out whether or not I have a library card, whether or not my library card is any good, whether or not it works in the Boston Public Library system, whether or not I even exist as an official entity. I keep meaning, I know the way to get to the bottom of all of that is simply to walk into the Boston Public Library in person. Not do it on the website, not call them on the phone, not guess, just walk in so they can see me radiating bookworm and we can just settle it all right there. I know that's the way to do it. I just haven't done that. In my own defense, the daytime high temperature in Boston for the last 35 days has been 5 degrees. So I haven't really felt like doing an extraneous errand, but I will. And then maybe I'll make more use of a library, in which case I guess I'll have to restrain myself from annotating library books, since all of you think it's like the worst crime against humanity in the history of the world. But that too is totally changed by this. Because I can annotate to my heart's content on this thing, without worrying about anything, without worrying about a thing. I don't have to worry about space. I don't have to worry about angling the book so that I can write in the limited space available. I don't have to worry about trying to find my own annotation. Weeks or months down the line, not in the slightest. I can just ask the device, where is my annotation and what did it say? This is George Boleyn. This is a modern biography of Anne Boleyn's brother, who was, he was a courtier. He was a poet. We don't have any of his poems. These two authors say that he was a great poem just because Thomas Wyatt said he was a great poem. The more you know, if you know anything at all about Anne Boleyn's immediate circle, you can make a pretty immediate guess why Thomas Wyatt would say George Boleyn was a great poet. But while I was reading this book, of course, the authors do a pretty good job. And I took lots of notes. The author doesn't have, an author doesn't have to do a pretty good job for me to take lots of notes. Let's look at them. I can just call up my annotations. I don't need to go paging through a book. I just call them up. Let's see what they are. Let's see, page 9. I highlighted the phrase general consensus, and my note is, cripes, could you stop using that dumb term? Consensus means general agreement. This is true. General consensus is a horrible misuse of English. Consensus means general agreement. When you say general consensus, you are saying general agreement, which is making yourself sound like a moron. And the authors do it. I made that note, but they do it all throughout the book. I just stopped paying attention to it. Then what's the next note? The authors write, the family into which Anne and George were born was one of the most respected in the English aristocracy. And my my note is bullshit. Okay, all right. Then the next note here, the authors write, and ultimately to Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. So something is stretching back all the way to Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. And my note to that was, bullshit. Okay. I don't have to check all the details of that. The next note here is from later on in the book, where we are told that George Boleyn is a talented poet and translator, and my note is also bullshit, because the authors haven't proven that. Can't prove it. Then we move on to the same way that Anne Boleyn was able to fascinate the king with her own blend of Boleyn charm. Okay, that was I just highlighted that. I didn't make a note on it. I just highlighted it because I liked it. It's the first time the authors in their book draw the obvious inference that George Boleyn could not possibly have been promoted the way he was just because he was Anne Boleyn's brother. It had to be that he had the Boleyn charm. It had to be that he did. So I didn't make any note on that. Then there's another highlight here, that George Boleyn did acquire sophisticated courtly skills in addition to his other attributes, to the degree that they were commented on in poetry, and that Anne did acquire skills as an accomplished politician in addition to her courtly skills, is a testament to their extraordinary capabilities as people. I highlighted that and I added a note. They were both beheaded. Well, I a card. Okay, let's move on. This is fun. Then the authors write that so-and-so was considered by his contemporaries to be as talented as the renowned poets of the age, Thomas Wyatt the Elder and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. And I left a note on that saying one contemporary, one very compromised contemporary, to underscore that the authors are blowing George Boleyn way out of proportion for what they can actually look at on the page. Let's see here. Okay, at one point they mentioned Sir John Harrington, and they refer to him, the phrase they used to refer to him is an author of literature. And I just noted he there, because that John Harrington would have found that hilarious. They clearly just don't know what to make of the guy, so they just say an author of literature. Another point in the book, they say court chivalry tended to be a defense against the boredom of having little meaningful employment within the court setup. And I highlighted that, and I added a note saying that's actually true. Well said. The authors write, Henry was a selfish, self-centered man with little patience. He would never have suffered the continued presence of a courtier whom he did not personally like. And I highlighted that because I like that. That is good, solid thinking. That there's no evidence for that, but that is solid thinking. That relies on an understanding of Henry that I think is accurate. And at another point they write, George Boleyn had been thrown into the maelstrom of vicious backstabbing and malice at court, that is, as a boy. And it says a lot about him that he was not able not only to survive, but also to thrive in such an atmosphere. I highlighted that, and I left a note saying, yes, it does. All of it bad. All right, little rapscallion. Let's see here. I highlighted a location. One of the manors that George Boleyn was given was Grimston in Norfolk. I highlighted that, probably to nudge myself to look into it. The authors write, contrary to popular opinion, a couple was only supposed to become betrothed and then married if they liked each other. My note, I highlighted that and added a simple note saying source. Because good luck trying to produce a source for that in Tudor times. The authors write, but rather than this being a deliberate attack on her, they're talking about Jane Parker, that infamous bawd, Jane Parker. They actually come to her defense, as many modern authors, many modern Tudor historians try to. They try to come to the defense of one of the least defensible people in the world. They write, but rather than this being a deliberate attack on her husband and sister-in-law, because Jane Parker gave evidence in Anne Boleyn's trial against Anne Boleyn and against her husband, George Boleyn. She gave evidence against them in order to save her own skin. But they write, but rather than this being a deliberate attack on her husband and sister-in-law, her evidence was more likely a simple matter of telling the truth and of self-preservation. I highlighted that and wrote, oh, come on. I didn't think it needed any more elaboration than that. Let's see here. The authors write, up until his downfall, George Boleyn had more reason than most to be grateful to the man who would do the most to destroy him, being Thomas Cromwell. And my note is, again, well said. But I don't have to look for it. I don't have to hunt for that note. I don't have to hunt for the mention of the manor that George Boleyn was given in Norfolk. I don't have to hunt for it. I can just ask the device where that note is. The authors write about George Boleyn, his growing reputation as a competent politician and diplomat. He seems to have established an excellent balance. And I highlighted that, and I made a note saying, you yourself have just finished describing him as an ineffectual blunderer who was recalled at least once for incompetence. I'm not even going to review this book, but I get caught up in the conversation about the book. I just do. And then the last thing that I mentioned here in the book is that on two separate occasions in the course of one page, our authors go out of their way to vilify the Duke of Norfolk, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, who was the uncle by marriage to George Boleyn and Anne Boleyn. They say at one point, the Duke of Norfolk, George's uncle, was a particularly odious individual. And then no more than 5 paragraphs later, they say there were few more repellent people than Norfolk, even in the 16th century. I didn't know what that even in the 16th century crack was all about. We were fun and giggles in the 16th century. But there you have an example of what I'm talking about, because you see, I did not have to go frantically flipping through pages to find those annotations. Nor do I have to go to this book to find them. I can email them to myself. Put them in a file next to this book, so that I don't have to consult the book at all. Anyway. Prompt number 5 is introductions and footnotes. Do you read them or avoid? What makes a good introduction? Of course I read them. I read every bit of a book. I don't skip anything. A book, of course I read them. Especially in the lens of being a critic. If something comes out, if a text is reprinted or a new translation comes out, the introduction is going to tell you a lot. It's most critics, if there's a new translation of the Iliad or the Constellation of Philosophy came up last night or whatever, most critics will just stop at the introduction when they want to assess the value of the translation one way or another. They'll just stop at the introduction because they can't assess the value of the translation any other way. My own translation reviews tend to be far more exhaustive than that. I will go to 4 or 5 other translations and try and draw a picture of how textually the new translation is different. But you have to go to the introduction for that anyway. And with the acknowledgments, I want to know, for instance, if I read a celebrity biography, the acknowledgment is going to be the only place where you will have any chance of knowing who actually wrote the book. And all of the other appurtenances. That once upon a time, scholarly works of research in biography or history had something called a bibliography, which was an exhaustive list of the sources the author used to pull their book together. Those aren't done anymore, but once upon a time, when scholarship was real, they were done, and you would of course want to consult those, not only to see what books the author consulted to pull their own book together, but to note if there are any notable omissions. If you want to know, if there's a new book about the Northern Clearances, well, if you know about the Northern Clearances, then you know the 2 absolute linchpin books on the subject. What if one of those books simply isn't mentioned anywhere in the author's notes or acknowledgments or bibliography or anything like that? What if it's just completely missing? Well, you know for sure, I'm sorry to get into the weeds here, but you know for sure if that happens, you know for sure that the author of the new book on the Northern Clearances is aware of the book that's not present anywhere in their critical apparatus. They have to be. Anyone looking at the subject from any depth will notice those two books right away. If one of those two books is not present, then it's not present for a reason. And that reason might be important. Was the author a student of the author of that earlier book? Maybe a resentful student? Was the author a discarded lover of the author of that earlier book? Whatever the reason, that omission immediately raises a doubt about the new book. And so on and so forth, all the way down the line. I mean, the obvious example here would be if somebody writes about, for instance, I don't even know, the Punic Wars. And you go to their bibliography and there are no original languages. There's no variorum or scholarly editions of the original, of the closest that we have to primary sources are there at all. In other words, you read their bibliography or their notes or whatnot, your annotations, and realize that the author does not read Latin or Greek. Well, that author could still write a really good book on the Punic Wars, but it means they're relying on someone else to tell them what those sources said. That's important to know. All of that is important to know. So I absolutely do read all of it. As to what makes a good introduction, well, I don't want the introduction to be ashamed of the book. I don't want the introduction to be criticizing the author. I want the introduction to be by somebody who is pleased with being asked to write it. And of course, I don't want the introduction to be a mere book report either. It's a bit of a fine art, which is why I have a whole wall of books that anthologize the ones that are done well. I also, I know I say this all the time, but a book critic who knows what they're doing should be able to avoid spoiling the book, to use that dumb phrase. They should be able to avoid that in their introduction. Or they should follow, for a long time, I think it was Mentor Books, commissioned an introductory essay by somebody, Leo Kazan or whoever, to write about the book, but then they put it at the back. And there would be a brief publisher's note at the beginning saying that we put the introduction to the book in the back of the book because it contains things that might ruin the book for the first-time reader. So don't read it until you're finished with the book. I mean, that's a good precaution, but really you should just find somebody else to write the thing. Because if you can't write a 6-page introduction to The Hunchback of Notre Dame without giving away the elements of the ending that are unlooked for and will genuinely provide an element of readerly fun for the reader, that is a spoiler. That is where there is a thing in this book that if you know ahead of time, you will not have the experience of learning it in the narrative. That's the thing that you want to avoid simply writing in your text. I mean, within limits, right? I mean, in Hamlet, everybody dies, and you know that. Everybody knows that. And in the Iliad, in the story of the Trojan War, Troy falls. It's when Troy fights the Greeks, Troy loses. But beyond that, like, I hate the whole term spoilers. To me, it feeds into this extremely performative extra delicacy that was all the rage in the last decade. But like, for instance, a lot of you who watch this channel are young. You haven't read the Western canon at all. I'm okay with that. I'm not mocking you for that. Let's just say there is a twist at the end of Aeschylus's play Oedipus Rex. There's a twist at the end of that play, and it means a lot, and it is unbelievably well known. There's a whole fraudulent pseudoscience called psychology that's entirely based on it. Nevertheless, a very first-time reader of that play who had never heard of it before, never knew anything about it, you might want to preserve that twist. Even in something that's 2,000 years old, you might want to preserve that twist. Certainly anything more recent than that. There are so many ways to get around it that an introduction that actually spoils the book is by someone you should certainly never hire again. But anyway, I said we should be brief because we're running out of light. And yet I'm dilating on every prompt here. Let's move on. Prompt number 6, accessories. Do you use bookish accessories like a clip-on reading light? Oh my God, I used to rant against those at the bookstore. They're so bad for your eyes. Clip-on reading lights are so bad for your eyes. It's not a question of how much light is on the page. It's a question of how much light is hitting your eyes. It's not a question of how bright your page is. It's a question of how much of that is bouncing back to your eyes, which is very little. They cause such eye strain. When I worked in a bookstore, we used to have a whole variety of them, and customers would come up to me and say, hey, I know you know a lot about books, but what about these clip-on lights? And I'd say, don't do them. Don't use them. But fortunately, we now have, not to make this the be-all and end-all of everything, but this emits light directly at your eyes, instead of partially reflected light from something that's hitting the page. Much improved. A great improvement. But the other accessories are a book sleeve, annotation materials, book stand. I've never understood a lot of these things. Annotation materials, well, yeah, I used to read with a pencil in hand. And if I'm stuck with a print and paper book, I will make sure to have a pencil in hand so that I can annotate the book. I don't need to do that with this at all. I can just annotate it to my heart's content without any instrument. But otherwise, most of these other things, no. No, just the book. Prompt number 7 is art and illustrations. How do cover art and illustrations affect your reading experience? They don't affect my reading experience at all. Nor should they. They don't affect my reading experience in the slightest. But they do affect my owning experience. I like a pretty book. Everybody does. And everybody has a slightly different idea of what a pretty book is. But a book that is very dull, very boringly designed, especially if it's a classic of some kind. Like if it's, if it's use an obvious example here. Let's say a paperback of Moby Dick that just has a dumb picture of a whale on it, and it isn't even a good picture of a whale. It's just a dumb picture of a book. Well, it's not gonna affect my reading experience. The minute I open it, I'm gonna get swept away. But I'm not going to want to keep that book because the aesthetic experience when I'm just looking at it or handling it is bad. Does that make me sound shallow? Am I a book talker now? I don't know. Then prompt number 8 is format. Which format of books do you prefer? Hardback, paperback, audio, digital? Do you do different things for different situations? This is a better mousetrap. This is an improvement on a technology that we have all used for the last 400 years. This is an improvement on that, whether it's a Kindle or a Kobo or whatever. This is an improvement, even when the improvement itself has flaws. This has to be charged. It shouldn't have to be charged. There ought to be a power cell that is this whole backside here that is just constantly absorbing electromagnetic radiation from all the other devices around it, from any ambient light. It doesn't take much power to keep this thing on. I should never need to plug it in. And, of course, infamously with Kindles, the power button should not be right there where I rest it in my hand. Obviously, it is an obvious power design flaw that Amazon is now proud of it, so they're never going to change it. But nevertheless, it's an obvious design flaw that is only there to push you to get a case, to buy something else on the Amazon system. Otherwise, whether it's Amazon or Kobo or anybody, this is superior. This has 7,000 books on it. Does it weigh anymore? No, it does not. Is the 7,000 print and paper books that I have here, are they well behaved? No, they are not at all well behaved. I look down there on the shelf, I see an old biography of David Hume. That reminds me of a great comment that Cyril Connolly once made about David Hume. Which of the Cyril Connolly print and paper books was that comment in? No idea. Was it in an essay specifically dedicated to David Hume? I don't think so. I think it was in some other essay. I think it was just an aside. Am I in good fortune if that's true? No, I'm SOL if that's true. On this, find the Cyril Connolly book and ask that book where all the mentions of David Hume are. Takes about a second. So this in almost all cases, unless I'm hunting for secondhand books where there is no e-copy, or I'm getting new books in the mail where, there might be an e-copy, but sometimes, a lot of times for new releases, the e-copy is a PDF. And again, a tiny little bug, a tiny little thing amidst a whole menu of superiorities. But PDFs, I don't get them to play very well on a Kindle at all. They tend to be more trouble than I'd end up wrestling with the PDF more than I do with the book, and that's not good. But usually, a huge amount of the time, so many people have emailed me over the last 2 years and said a variation on, I still go and get books. I love going to used bookstores, but reading on this is so easy. It's just so easy. That word comes up over and over and over again, and I agree with it completely. It is easier. But anyway, this thing has, I think, a water protection index where you could completely submerge it for 30 minutes to a depth of 9 feet. So you could drop it into the deep end of a swimming pool. It would sink all the way to the bottom with George Boleyn, who never bathed in his life. It would sink all the way to the bottom of the deep end of the pool. It could sit there for half an hour, probably longer. Then you dive down there, you get it, you bring it up, you shake it out, and it works just fine. Which means, not that I'm ever going to do that, of course, but it means that this can sit on a shelf in the bathroom. The bathroom gets steamy, water goes flying, whatever. It's not going to matter at all. It's not going to hurt this thing in the slightest. It can sit on a shelf in the bathroom waiting for me. And because it's a Kindle, an e-reader, because all it has to do is handle black and white e-ink, one full charge on this thing, I don't have to think about it. For a long, long time, I don't have to think about it until I have to charge it again. So even in the bathroom, if I put a print and paper book on a shelf in the bathroom, I run a serious risk of mildew or silverfish or whatnot, because the bathroom periodically does get all misty from a shower. I run the risk of it falling off the shelf into the toilet bowl or into a sink. I run a lot of risks with a book like that in the bathroom. And I also can't ask it to search for anything, and I need a pencil in addition. Pencil has to be somewhere in the bathroom in order to annotate it. So this thing just sits there instead, and it's just more convenient. In pretty much any environment. The bed in the little book room, when it's time to shut down the circus and turn into a pumpkin and just read, well, okay, I've got lots of print and paper books here, but I've also got this. It doesn't weigh anything. It has 7,000 books on it. It's right there. It's so easy to do. Anyway, it used to be that I used a variety of formats. It's now every format has to make an excuse. Every format has to toe the line, this line. And a lot of them don't. A lot of them just don't. Even though I love finding used books at the Brattle Bookshop and elsewhere, I have found that most of the books that I find in secondhand venues now are things that I don't think I can find in ebook format. But anyway, and then prompt number 9 is to tag some people. But as we started off like 3 hours ago when this video started, the whole internet has made a little indoor game out of not tagging me because they hate me because I smell. So I'm not going to tag anybody. All you fragrant people out there, I'm not going to tag anybody. But no, seriously, I think a lot of people have done this. And a lot of people who've done this have also issued blanket tags, said, I'm not going to tag anybody specifically. These are exactly the kind of questions that I want to hear answers to. I am nosy, so feel free to do this tag if you have not. It's wonderful. I'll leave links to at least 3 of the people who summarily ignored me. Yes, what would a tag be without that? But I'm going to wrap this up at long last with a 2-hour tag video, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.